Good morning to
Apologize.
you, Mother.
Good morning, Sincere. So nice to see you.
Yes. So, as we start this series, so to speak, um, I want to try to backtrack so that you could kind of understand, how I developed into this serial entrepreneur that you see now. It really started from seeing you, whether it was Xerox, I believe was the first one, or Arthur Anderson, and of course, Digital Equipment Corporation. Like, what age were you at that time, and what what made you decide to go into, let's just say, accounting, for lack of a better word, as opposed to, some nonprofit position or something like that?
Well, I was working as an intern for Arthur Anderson, and I had a wonderful mentor. And he indicated that it's important to have a position for which people will always have demand. So since he was a CPA, he thought accounting had served him well. He was one of the people who had left Cuba and come to the United States. And he was able to wind up being a director position in Arthur Anderson. So I went into accounting because that was what my mentor advised.
Okay, that's a good rule of thumb, having a good mentor, someone to guide you, let's say, on your journey. I mean, whether you knew it or not, you were my mentor, of course. And it was just watching, what I guess I would consider the hustle, right, at the time, making sure that you were always, on trend, so to speak, or ahead of the trend, whatever it may be. Not just the way that you carried yourself or the way that you spoke, but also in business as well. So I had seen that from a very early age, you doing that in the various jobs and places that you had been. Were there reasons or tips that you had gotten along the way that made you decide to, let's say, rise above the type of people that you went to school with and the people that you were around at the time?
Well, my family was, uh, my father was 30 years military. So he bought the side of a mountain and decided that he was going to retire to Colorado. Because we were the only Black family in the place, we didn't necessarily, or I didn't particularly, I have to say me, didn't particularly see myself as being part of the people I was around. They had different goals. My goal was what my parents who adopted me had always wanted, for me to go to college. Well, people around me were not thinking about college. Secondly, I was identified as being gifted in the second grade. So I went on a totally different trajectory of the people around me. And the school, like hired people to teach me. And when I got to high school, there was now 7 of us, and we focused on how to move forward in terms of getting into college, which was not the norm of where the people surrounded me. So I was separated from the people that were around me, and I had different goals. So that's how I got to get to, college and think about myself differently than the folks that I grew up with.
Well, again, so I'm sorry reiterating the question. So how did you necessarily rise above that? We're talking 60s, correct? 50s, 60s?
Yeah, we're talking 60s.
Okay. So no internet, no Google, no
No,
Tony Robbins, no, how do you in your circumstance or your environment, and in this case you're on the side of a mountain, Like, how do you rise above? Where does that mentality come from? Is that just born with it, or is that something that
No, my
you had to, let's say, utilize, upgrade, make stronger? What was your approach?
Uh, m- my approach was that, obviously by being adopted, my parents made me feel very special and was very open. My father in particular was very open about it. So I felt that there was a need for me to make their investment in me pay off. So that was number one. Number two is that the use of the library and books. And since I was not a very social person, because there was really no reason to socialize with the people around me, I spent a lot of time. My first job was at the Air Force Academy. So I got introduced to college people who had a different mindset than the people around me. So I spent most of my time on weekends at the Air Force Academy learning, and then I worked at the Air Force Academy, and I earned the right to be able to take classes with the cadets. So I just got a different idea of who I am and what I'm capable of.
Okay. So you rose above what you were dealing with by noticing the difference between you and the individuals let's say you went to school with or were in the town with. And instead of, let's say, settling for what they would do or, what they could offer, you upgraded your situation by being exposed, through grandpa, being exposed to the Air Force Base. And then that exposure brought some similarities or some exposure to wanting to be the best. And that stemmed from your family, since it was more a chosen family than a natural family. You wanted to make sure that, as you said, the investment that they placed in you was well worth it.
Absolutely.
Okay. So that's some self-dignity, self-respect, stemming from the way that you were raised through your parents. And then going through that respect you have for your parents, you're exposed to their world and you found some similarities in their world that could take you to the next level.
Yes, sir.
Awesome. So those are some of the basics, right? So before we really get into entrepreneurship and these types of things, you need to understand that these were sort of the things that were instilled in me, whether you knew it or not. So even though, I'll give you for an example, I always talk about the 6 months we lived in that, in the hotel,
Yeah.
I always reference that. And though I was a kid, right? Though I was a kid running around, causing a muck, right? I was still taking in information of how we even got here and how long we were going to be here. So though on the outside it looked like I'm just running amok and running up the room service tab and all that other stuff, I was actually absorbing a lot of other information about where we had came from in terms of Ohio, in terms of Rochester, how we ended up here, and then was in the biggest house I'd ever seen, 6 months later. So that information superseded what you were, parenting through, so to speak. So I want to go back and cover the basics. But entrepreneurship and these types of things really stem from very early on, very, very early on, whether it's seeing your parents and how they make money or seeing other people around you and how they make money, the exposure to people that are on a higher level than us and wanting to do what we can to get to their level and then eventually supersede. The entrepreneurship and the way that we're going to discuss this really starts from a cellular level. Really, that information that you took in, that you held on to as a child and saw your parents doing it, which was always the best example, is seeing your parents, because then you could say, oh, that's part of who I should be as well. So it's a lot easier to do that. When you see it through, your Tony Robbins and all these other people. There's some things there that you can adhere to and change cellularly, but to have that from a daily exposure through your parents and family is probably one of the biggest rules, and one way that separates a lot of people from, the ones that are starting now and the ones that actually have been doing this for a long time. So I'll stop it there, but I like where we're going with this. We're going to cover some very simplistic ground. I will take your approach on how you got where you got to, and we'll get into that. But I'm always going to take the time to say, okay, this is what you mean this, just to summarize for the watchers or listeners. All right?
Okay.
All right, episode 1. No need to.
Thank you so much.
You got it, Ma.